Jason Little, and this is 10 minutes off the top of my head. Now we are in Romans chapter number 4, and we stopped in verse number 11 last time, looking at how Abraham was uncircumcised when he was already saved, when righteousness was imputed to him, when his account was cleared, when God made a deposit into Abraham's account that he has with God of righteousness, and all of his unrighteousness and all of his debt was completely canceled. And that's exactly what happens to you and I the moment that we get saved. Our debts with God are completely canceled. We don't owe him anymore, and he doesn't owe us anything, never did. But he gives us that grace. He makes that deposit into our account, if you will, like I spoke about in the last video. And he doesn't put into our account sin. He doesn't make deposits of sin in there, but deposits of righteousness, and we're completely covered. It's an inexhaustible supply, by the way. It doesn't run out. Even if you run out, it doesn't run out. So verse 11 again, and he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of faith, which he had yet being uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all them that believe, though they be not circumcised, that righteousness might be imputed unto them also, and the father of circumcision to them who are not of the circumcision only, but who also walk in the steps of the father of that faith of our father Abraham, which he had yet being uncircumcised, For the promise that he should be the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. So when Abraham got up and left, in fact, let's go back into Genesis and look at this. Abraham in chapter number 12, I believe it is where Abraham is called by God, and Abraham gets up out of Ur of the Chaldees and leaves to that land where God will show him. So Abraham, Genesis chapter 12. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation. I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. God is talking specifically, by the way, about Jesus right here. He's speaking specifically about Jesus because Jesus comes from the line of Abraham. He comes from Abraham, from Isaac, from Jacob. So look at it this way. Abraham had Isaac. Isaac had Jacob. Jacob had Judah. And then Judah had David. And Judah had, all of his... David was not a direct child of Jacob, but he was a child of a child of a child. So he is in that line, and that's where Jesus comes from. You can read the genealogy in Matthew and in Luke. So he says, I will be that in him shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So Abraham departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. So Abraham, at this point, God tells him, get up, get out, go. Abraham goes. That's when the righteousness was imputed to Abraham. Now we look over here a few more chapters, 5 chapters later in chapter 17. And when Abram was 99 years old, wow, you ought to read the Bible word for word. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. And when Abram was 90 years old and 9, the Lord appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God, walk before me and be thou perfect. This is after Abraham had already been imperfect. This is after Abraham had gone, I believe he had gone down to Egypt already, and he had already done things that he should not have done, and he had already lied and cheated. Yep, Abraham goes to Egypt in chapter 13. He had already lied to the Pharaoh about who Sarah was. And so Abraham has already done these bad things that he should not have ever done. And God says to him now, be thou perfect. So when we think about in terms of salvation, does God want Abraham to be perfect before he's saved? No. God says to him in chapter 17, the man was 75 years old in chapter 12. It's now chapter 17. He's 99 years old. How many years is that later? It is 24 years later. God says, be thou perfect. Walk before me and be thou perfect. And I will make my covenant between... Now listen, God is not making this conditional on Abraham walking before him and being perfect, because later on, Abraham's going to repeat the same sin that he did with Pharaoh with another man named Abimelech. He says, and I will make my covenant between me and thee, and I will multiply thee exceedingly. And Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, as for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. God is not telling him, if you do these things, then you'll be a father of many nations. God's saying, this is my covenant to you. I'm going to do these things. Period. End of story. And he goes on to say, neither shall thy name anymore be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee. And I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee, and thy seed after thee, in their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee, and to thy seed after thee. And I will give unto thee, and to thy seed after thee, the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Period. Right? God's not saying, as long as you do these things. God's saying, this is what's going to happen, Abraham. And then God says, in verse 9, and God said unto Abraham, thou shalt keep my covenant, therefore, thou and thy seed after thee in their generations. This is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised. Bam, there it is, chapter 17. I said chapter 12, I think, the last video, but it's chapter 17. Okay, so Abraham gets called out of Ur of the Chaldees in chapter 12. He gets circumcised in chapter 17, 24 years later. So don't get it confused, and don't get it mixed up. And do not confuse salvation and discipleship, because there's a lot of verses in the Bible that are written about salvation, and there's a lot of verses in the Bible that are written about discipleship, and we should not confuse these verses. Should you be perfect before God? Should you walk before God and be perfect? Yes, you should. Absolutely, 100%. Should you do everything that you could, that you can, that you might do, that you could do, that you would do, that you should do to do right before God? Yes, you should. Should you do everything you can to please God? Yes, you should. But the Bible tells us that without faith, it is impossible to please God. So without faith, without being saved, you cannot please God. And there's so many people out there who are not saved, who are preaching a gospel, which is not the gospel, about salvation, saying you have to do these things, you have to continue to do these things, you have to do these things to be saved, then you have to continue to do these things in order to stay saved. It's a lie. It's not true. Look through the Bible. Look at the examples we're given. Abraham, a sinner, a horrible sinner. God calls him righteous over and over again. Samson, this guy was a scoundrel. He was a scum. Forget Samson. Look at Jacob. Jacob was a scoundrel. Samson was a scoundrel. David was a scoundrel. Solomon was a scoundrel. All these guys throughout the Bible, they're bums, man. They're bums. The way that they treat women, the way that they act towards other men, the things that they do, the sins that they commit. I'll tell you what. I'm a bad dude. I've done some things in my life that I'm not proud of, but I've never done anything like Abraham's done. I've never taken my wife somewhere and said, she's my sister. I've never killed folks for fun like Samson did. I mean, the guy was crazy. He was nuts. I didn't go and marry some lost chick because I felt like, look at all the things that he did. I've never committed suicide like Samson did. I don't have multiple wives. I don't have like 10 women living here in my house that I'm married to like Solomon did. I didn't cheat on my wife with another woman, marry her, and then kill her husband, or kill her husband, then marry her like David did. Look at these guys that are the examples that we have. Were they all lost? Because according to modern day theological standards in the evangelical church, there's not a single one of those dudes that are saved. They're all in hell right now. If you listen to the Paul Washers of the world, if you listen to the guys that the John Pipers, the Paul Washers, the John MacArthurs, those guys are lost. There's no possible way that they're saved. No possible way. No possible way. All right. So Romans chapter 4, we didn't get very far, but on the next video, I'm going to try and finish it up. I promise. I'm going to try, but no promises. See you on the next video. God bless you.